Ashley is an Everytown for Gun Safety Survivor Fellow, class of 2019. She is also a volunteer leader with Moms Demand Action and also Student Demand Action. Professionally, Ashley works in higher education, having represented 5 colleges and universities in her career. Currently, she works at Coastal Carolina University in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Personally, Ashley is married to her best friend Rob, and they live a child-free life with 2 furry kids in Myrtle Beach. Ashley loves sweet tea, musical theater, roller skating, and anything with drag queens. She tirelessly advocates for mental health support of gun violence survivors and looks to pursue her doctorate in this very topic very soon. Let's welcome her. Welcome back, Grief Nation listeners. And today on our show, I have a very special guest, and this is also a part of the Everytown Survivor Network series, Ashley Cohen. Ashley is a 3-time gun violence survivor and prevention advocate. Hello, Ashley. How are you?
I'm doing good today, Mamie. How are you?
I'm doing great. So glad to have you on the show finally. Yay.
Happy to be here.
I thought it was so prevalent that you would come on the show today because it is Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. So can you please tell us about your journey, about the 3 times survivor of being a gun violence survivor?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first experience with gun violence, personal direct experience with gun violence, was the loss of my very dear college friend. His name's Corey Hardison, and he took his own life with a gun when I was a junior in college. The summer between my sophomore and junior year, now that I think about it a little bit more. So yeah, summer of 99 was when he bought a firearm the same day as he took his life.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We had a pretty strong group of friends, pretty big group of friends. He was a non-theater major in a group of all theater and performance majors. So, and I'm getting close with his sister and learning a little bit more about his family and upbringing. That is not an unusual thing. He was raised around artists and just kind of was attracted to being around artists. And so it makes sense that he ended up being roommates with 3 theater major young men. And I ended up dating one of his roommates in college. And that's how we all met. And so we were very close, and I met them my freshman year. And, you know, as you do in college, you're hanging around with those people. And if you're in a relationship, you're hanging around that apartment a lot. And you're getting to know everybody. And we just became close because as a younger theater major, you're not doing as many shows. Generally, depending on where you go to school, you're doing a lot of kind of tech work stuff and behind the scenes stuff that happened later. So most of his roommates were actors and performers, and they were involved in longer rehearsals. And so I spent a lot of time sitting around at that apartment, listening to music and, you know, playing video games and just kind of getting to know Corey. And we became, was kind of a sibling relationship, for lack of a better word. And then his death surprised everyone. No one saw any signs that we knew of. No one expected anything. And he didn't come to a party. And we were all wondering where he was. And I remember calling, I knew he'd worked that day, but no one had seen him or talked to him. And I called a bunch of times this was 99, so there wasn't cell phones. We couldn't just be like, find your friends, you know, we had to call the apartment. And no answer, and no one knew where he was, and then never showed up to the party. And the next day, you know, we found out where he was. And it was, I always say, like, we were 20 and 21 years old telling each other about what happened. You know, his family let us know, and then we had to tell each other. And that's a lot for 20-year-olds, for young people to sort of take on the telling of that news and sharing of that news. So that was my first experience with gun violence, which I'll be totally honest, I didn't really think about gun suicide as gun violence then. it just wasn't on my radar to think about it like that. But it was a trauma and impacted my kind of what's the word I'm looking for, trajectory, because I ended up going into Masters of Higher Education, kind of going into this field to help college students and kind of keep an eye out for students that may be suffering or may have things. So it was sort of a weird launch into what I'm interested in and what I do professionally. So then I graduated from my master's, I was skipping a bunch of years. I graduated and went to a school in Norfolk, Virginia, Old Dominion University for my master's. And I forgot to mention, because this is important, Corey and I went to college together at Virginia Tech. Okay. And so I graduated Virginia Tech, went and got my master's, came back to work at Virginia Tech, my alma mater. Who doesn't want to work at your alma mater? More sidebars, because this is a very layered story. Blacksburg, which is where Virginia Tech is my hometown. I moved there when I was a child. So I did middle school, high school, and then undergrad. Mm-hmm. It's like, I got to go somewhere else for my master's degree. Went to ODU, came back because there was a position there. It was home. I started working full-time there in 2005. And so the first year as a young professional was great. The second year, not so much. The 2006-2007 academic year is bookended in gun violence for me. And most people are abundantly aware of the mass shooting at Virginia Tech in April of 2007. Not as many people are aware that the first day of class was a homicide on campus of a local police officer, and the shooter in that circumstance was a high school friend of mine who had slipped into mental illness, had escaped prison, and took the firearm of a police officer. And and I really, the details are very murky, as you can probably understand, but I remember so vividly thinking, because it was August 21st, which is the same day that Corey died, like not the same day, but the anniversary of Corey's death. And it had always kind of haunted me, the first day of school and August 21st. And so this was happening on campus on August 21st, 2006. And I remember kind of hearing, it wasn't a sophisticated alert system then, but kind of murmurs of this happening, and word got out, within my office and on campus of who was doing it. Mm-hmm. And I remember saying to one of my supervisors, I know him. We were friends in high school. And they suggested I connect with campus police, get an escort to my car, just in case, for safety. So I took them up on that offer and was walked to my car and went home. And then 8 months later, the mass shooting at Tech, which is that's a whole other 45 minutes of a podcast, to talk about that same officer ended up being the one that kind of guarded my office after that happened. Not my specific office, but like the office that I worked in. Like, he would make sure we were employees, and he would make sure we would get in and out of the building okay. And so this is just what is going on here. So it's three very weirdly connected incidents.
Wow. That's a lot.
It is a lot.
I'm so sorry that you've had to experience that. And like you say, it's very layered, and the intertwining, which is, I don't even have a word for it, but it's just all I can ask next is, how did you continue to pull through after each tragedy? I mean, there's nothing else for me to say, but of course, I'm sorry that you've had experienced this, but how, from three different different types of gun violence tragedies, how are you able to pull through this? What was that shining lighter for you? Tell me your experience in going through all of that.
My immediate reaction is my mother and my family. I've always had pretty strong support, and my mom has always said that I'm like a very resilient person in general. I adapt, I pivot. I fully identify as an empathic person. I'm a very highly sensitive person, an intuitive person. So I think I kind of just drew on all of those things. And the interesting thing, and when I was thinking about this conversation, one of the things that happens a lot with these types of situations is um, I'm also not a religious person. So I've been my whole life kind of looking for things and using my intuition, using my feelings and, music or arts or things like that kind of to anchor me in these circumstances. So when I think back on like immediate reactions to all of these things, it involves some kind of like meditation, coupled with some kind of arts. And I'm, being involved in theater and being around the arts my whole time. So it's some kind of art type of thing. Like I would just dive headfirst into a CD that I felt really, really called to, CD, listen to me.
I remember those.
um, or like just the comfort came from that kind of. I'm also just born to be an advocate and an activist. And so it's always been, how can I use this experience to keep others from ever having to go through this experience? And I remember a really poignant moment when the mass shooting happened. I had a friend who lives in Littleton, Colorado. She's around my age, just lives in the town, but I was living in that area when Columbine happened. And I remember her texting me, because that was a thing. It was a new thing, but it was a thing. Texting me the day or two after the mass shooting and just saying, it's going to get worse first, and then it'll start to taper off and get better. And I asked her, I said, what could possibly be worse? She says, because everyone's going to be watching. Everyone's going to be giving you attention. Everyone's going to be in your community, and it's going to make it really hard to grieve, and it's going to make it really hard to move forward. And I remember that, just clinging to that and once I kind of got through that part, I use air quotes because you don't really get through that. Yeah. But I remember, having that kind of conversation with other friends at other schools and other communities. I just looked at those types of incidents very differently, and took that sentence with me. It's like I would say, listen, this is not helpful, but I need to prepare you. It will get worse for a little while before that worse starts to ease up, and normal will start to kind of ease on in. I don't know if that makes any sense, but so there's a variety of tactics. That's a long answer to that question, but
no, I get it.
Yeah, drew on a lot of different things and learned a lot.
And what would you say in between that time? And I'm so excited that you started talking about being empathic and drawing in on your intuition. I'm the same way. I have grown up with a religious background of being a Christian, but I also knew that there was so much more that I was drawn to from a child, just from my family telling me of the things that I would do as a child. So I was always drawn to something even greater. But it's so interesting that you stated that. So what I want to know is, like, in between the time, and I'll say so that we can kind of narrow it down. So from the first incident of losing your friend, how long do you feel in between that time period that you were actually able to find some type of grounding before you just didn't feel crazy anymore? How in between that time from when it happened, how long would you say before the next incident, or did it even occur?
That's
some grounding.
That's an interesting question, because I think it after Corey died, how I know you directly understand this. There's people that kind of jump into the fixing of things. They kind of are the people that, we're going to tell the friends, we're going to tell the professors. It was me and another friend that did that. So we immediately went into action. And then that had to come down. So, and then that started to come down, and I I used that semester of school to, I mean, I joined a service fraternity. Like I joined and put his picture at the front page of the little notebook that we had to fill in as we talked to our brothers and get to know. So I immediately started kind of
Wow.
talking about that and processing it and saying, I'm doing this service fraternity for my friend who just passed and isn't going to finish college. And
Yeah.
we had no idea that he like what brought him to that moment. So I feel like it was kind of a quick period because I just took what I thought was advocate type of action very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I then started to notice, that relationship fizzled because of how the boyfriend because of how he reacted to it. Not
Yeah.
because it was intentional, but it just happens like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then different friends did different things. So I think when I started to notice other people having what I felt were adverse, unhealthy reactions,
Mm-hmm.
especially as college students when unhealthy decisions are everywhere.
Yeah.
I just wanted nothing to do with that. My attention drew back on my health, and my strength. So I started going to the gym and weight training and just kind of staying as healthy as I can, keeping my instrument, my body and my mind just like ready. And that's, I see that as as an older person now. I see it a little bit in the trauma response side of things,
Mm-hmm.
but at the time, it kind of gave me a goal and gave me something to focus on, and always kind of keeping the why behind it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's what sparked this, and to lose a friend that young
Mm-hmm.
and that way is just, it can be very devastating. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to just be devastated.
Yeah.
And I remember getting into grad school, which was only a couple of years afterwards. I think I applied 2002 or so,
Mm-hmm.
2003 maybe, and the first essay I wrote was on him. Was I think that this is such an overlooked piece of higher education and of college. So it's just, now that I think about it, I smile a little because I'm like,
Yeah.
there's that
Yeah.
impact, there's that intuitive thing kind of kicking
Yeah.
in.
Mm-hmm.
But then, it's been a journey too, because years after I reconnected with Corey's sister, and that's happened within the past year or so, and I've been able to learn some things about that experience from her perspective, which has been very, it's brought it back up, but like in a way that I can process it a little bit differently, and understand things a little bit more. I know that's vague, but it's been very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it kind of recycles itself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally get it. Sometimes when I talk to Taiki's best friend family, it reopens that wound, but at the same time, I was in a total different world than they were, because Taiki had survived and their child had passed away. So I wasn't like fully connected with the feelings or the vibration of what was happening in their world, because I was over trying to make sure he was okay, he was doing fine, rehab,
Yeah.
excited about him being surviving. And then so now when I we kind of get together and we talk and we share our experiences of that day or even that week, they're totally different. And it's like sometimes I have this remorse that'll come back on me if when Taiki survived and their child didn't. It's just weird. Hearing from the families, like you said, you had this experience with his sister, and it can make you feel some kinds of ways, just depending on the
Yeah.
your relationship. But it's, at the end of the day, there's still a healing mechanism in there for you too, because it's something that you probably needed to hear. And I get that. So thank you for sharing that.
You're
You
welcome.
spoke about in your bio, you had told me, you stated being a non-injured survivor in your bio. Explain to my Grief Nation listeners exactly what that entails.
Well, I wasn't injured physically
Mm-hmm.
in any of these incidents of gun violence.
Right.
I was deeply injured mentally and emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been a long forming sentence that I can say and statement that I can make, because it is a very different type of injury than having a wound or having, I mean, I think about, with the mass shooting at Virginia Tech, there were 32 students, faculty, staff that were murdered and their lives ended. And then there were 17 that were shot and injured,
Yeah.
and survived in that way. But then you think about the ones that were not shot but jumped out of the window and hurt their ankle
Yeah.
and or their wrist. And then you think about those of us that were in the building next door that just have these emotional wounds. So I kind of have come to this clarity piece where that's what it is. It's non-physically injured. And I put it out there because as soon as I start talking about that situation with people, or like where I was, oh, you worked at Virginia Tech, I just can, I can just feel the questions coming. Sometimes
Yeah.
I work there from X to X time. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And so dealing with a lot of that, and I want to go back and real quick say I work in a really public facing type of job. I work in admissions and recruitment, and worked in admissions and recruitment. So we were very front and center, because at that time, April was COVID changed it a little bit, but at the time, April's a very important month for students to visit schools and for there to be recruitment. So we were very, I was recruiting 10, 12 hours after it happened. So I had to kind of come up with my answer really fast. And I would say, yes, I was there. Were you hurt? No. Which is a weird answer because I was very much hurt, so
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
so after a lot of kind of working through that and understanding, yeah, I was hurt, but I don't want to say, so I had to kind of come up with my own way of responding to it. And in part of my advocacy and platform and just direction in this is advocating for those of us that have mental injuries, emotional injuries, from these types of incidents, from all three, honestly, from all three incidents. There's mental trauma associated with it. And you as well as I know find that sometimes in the gun violence prevention movement, a lot of the pushback is, well, this is a mental health issue. And I'm the first person to say, yeah, it 100% is, but why don't we talk about the mental health of those that have gone through these things?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because if we can work on that, they won't cycle quite like they do, possibly. So that's kind of what I mean by that. And then I've narrowed it even more in working with being an Everytown fellow and just kind of working as from the survivor lens. I've narrowed it even more to say that I'm a school shooting survivor as opposed to mass shooting survivor. As that definition has become clarified and the media sees it more often, I just shrink it back. I just, hone in on this is what it was, because our experience is different than someone who was at a Walmart or at a concert where you maybe know the people you came with, but it's not the same kind of thing. I hope that makes some kind of sense.
Yeah. It does.
So it strips back those layers a little bit and makes it very personalized for me, but in a way that I can educate with,
It's great that we have Everytown, of course, and Moms Demand Action, because it gives the survivor the opportunity to be able to share their sense of loss or the emotion behind what they're feeling. Because I would have never, you've opened my eyes up to even say, hey, outside of mass shooting, there still were children. Even it could have been some individuals that didn't make it to school that day, but they are going to have some type of trauma because they know the classroom, they know the setting, so they need a safe space to be able to articulate those feelings and be able to state that, hey, I'm still affected. If I was in the cafeteria where it happened, or if I was in a back classroom.
Absolutely.
Either way, so I really am so grateful, like I said, to have Everytown, and so that survivors do get an opportunity to come forward like yourself to say, hey, we need to also look at this, because it gives us so much more clarity of how you felt, what more we should be looking towards, because it's just uncertain times right now, even though a lot of children are at home, and it's COVID right now, but a lot of kids are going back to school. But I think what has happened in COVID is we're starting to, now that we're so shut up for so long and was being socially isolated, people are coming out now, and then they're no longer they're not regressing those feelings. They're actually coming out, like all of the anger and resentment and everything that COVID probably could have taken away from them. So it's just, we still have to be mindful and vigilant on watching, having that eye out for things that could go wrong at the school outside of COVID. We still have to be mindful, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, gosh. Whew. Okay. So that was a whole lot right there.
You mentioned the people that didn't come in. I mean, that was two of my coworkers. One was already traveling, and one was sick. The friend I talked about earlier that teaches at LSU, she was on her way in, and her roommates told her to turn around. And there's this thing in this community called survivor's guilt, and it's this. Why did I not take this path? And that weighs a lot. No, I'm preaching to the choir here, but
girl, you gave me chill bumps.
Weighs a lot to say, I have a friend who stepped out to get a coffee on 9/11, and you just have this moment of, and being a very intuitive person now. And I joke with my family and my husband, it's not really a joke, but I always just say, I have a feeling.
Yeah.
And I have to be really careful that, I'm not making a pink flag a red flag. You know what I mean? Like it's truly an alarm and I need to not do it. Or is this that trauma fear? And so we have that. And there's this, it can go, and especially with gun violence, it can go both ways. I mean, there's people that have that kind of trauma fear that go, I have to be safe as possible all the time. And part of their safe is arming themselves.
Yeah.
And there's people that have to be safe all the time, and part of their safe, and this is personal, is having nothing to do at all, or being in the space with weapons. I want nothing to do with it. If I know a business allows it, I'm not going there. And that's just my own response to it. So it's very nuanced. And I do this so that I can talk about it. And so other people go, oh, I didn't think about that.
Oh, yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Absolutely. You're definitely peeling back some of the layers of the onion for me, because for me, that's with my son, that was the survivor's guilt, but also having to want to protect himself because someone was after him and killed his best friend. So wanting to make sure that he was safe was the reasoning that we could never, we thought about and talked about his father and I definitely talked about, okay, he shouldn't have this gun. We know that, he's had some mental health issues, some concerns, and we knew all of the things that came along with the traumatic brain injury. But it was so much deeper of him wanting to protect himself because he was scared for his life. So it's, as you keep talking, and you're so right about all of the things that you're saying. And I'm so glad you're on the show today, because you're making exactly what I put this podcast in, and I created the space for this podcast so individuals like yourself can just help open the eyes of others, giving them the opportunity to say, hey, this is my story, but yet there's so many layers of this story. Like you have showcased here today with the three of you being a 3-time survivor. That is just in itself like, oh my gosh. And that's why it's like, I want people to know, if you have been able to go through all these different things and you've learned from each experience, you're still learning, you're still growing. Why is it, why do you have this why? What is your why? Explain that to the Grief Nation listeners.
Sure. The people that can't
Mm.
and don't go another day because of this. They're my why. Corey's my why. I'm not really much of a crier, but I always get that little choked up thing when I'd say that. He's my why. The 32 students and faculty that were murdered, they're my why. They've been my why for 13 years, and I do that because the lives were specifically cut short by some external factor,
Mm-hmm.
and mine wasn't. And okay, let's go,
Yeah.
keep going. I mean, I was so grateful. You can't really see it, but I keep going tattooed on
Oh,
my
yes, I see. Yeah, yes.
um
Yeah.
and I was just so grateful to latch onto that with Everytown and with kind of with the hashtag thing. But it's been my thing for a long time, just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and keep going. And the why shifts. I'll be totally honest. I mean, when you get to the core of it,
Mm-hmm.
it's those individuals that can't, um, because of being murdered or taken from us. Um, we don't know what their wishes were. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
And I get the opportunity to change what my wishes are,
Mm-hmm.
and have the opportunity to get my master's, which was after Corey passed, and then
Mm-hmm.
now have a long career. I would be remiss, and it would do a total disservice to my platform if I didn't say that I had a full mental collapse
Mm-hmm.
several years ago, when I was working for another campus. I've worked for 5 colleges and universities since I started my career, and I'm happily at one now and doing okay. There's days that are not great,
Yeah.
but at one, I just collapsed. So I took several years off, worked from home, and that was the beginning of learning about my own mental health
Mm-hmm.
and really the damage that had been caused,
Yeah.
and taking ownership of that. And so that's when I started doing therapy,
Mm-hmm.
very, very intense therapy around that time, and just kind of getting a diagnosis,
Yeah.
getting a direction,
Mm-hmm.
getting some assistance. And so that is also my why, is to center myself and to center my health and to be the best person I can be in whatever space I am so very fortunate to
Mm-hmm.
get to be in, if that makes any sense at all.
Oh yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. Because I'm curious of how did Corey's death change your relationships or friendships?
Good question. I think I'm naturally an introverted person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I've always had a value and drawn to very deep relationships and getting to know people,
Yeah.
as opposed to the social butterfly necessarily that has lots and lots of kind of fringe friends. Nothing wrong with that. I like that too. I'm raised by those by extroverts. So married one, that kind of thing. But me, it gave me the opportunity to um, deepen relationships, or know that I didn't want to deepen a relationship and set that boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Know that that person is this kind of acquaintance or this kind of friend. I hope that if that probably sounds a little negative, and that's okay if it does, because I think it's just given me some kind of like a little radar
Yeah.
to say, do I want to go in deep with this? Because to get to know me as a friend is to get to know this part, and to get to know me in any relationship. My spouse and my first husband would say the same thing, is to kind of go in with that, and knowing that you're dealing with someone who we have plans, and it's very possible that I won't do those plans.
Mm-hmm.
I'll either have a feeling, or I'll just be worn out, or
Yeah.
and I've had friends that are kind of those fringe friends say that that's fickle, or that it's flighty, or whatever the case may be. And to dig a little deeper, it's not that at all. It's just that kind of caution thing coming in. So it's impacted them in both negative and positive ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's enriched the close friendships that I do have. And what I look for in relationships of any kind. I don't
Yeah.
have a lot of, I didn't have 12 bridesmaids or anything like that. It's that kind of thing. Like I kind of keep my cards close to my chest, and
Yeah.
you may get a peek, or I may turn the whole thing around and let you see it. And
Mhm.
that's the sort of layers that we deal with friendships for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get it. And I was also wondering, were you impacted at all about being in certain places or spaces?
Yeah, definitely is the answer to that question. The biggest, well, after Corey died, I had an aversion fully to firearms.
Mm.
It happened very quickly. Like, oh my God, it just and I won't get into the details just yet, but it just was an aversion to them. Um, if I saw someone, and I lived in Virginia, so if I saw someone with a gun, or was a place where I knew there would be one, it was not somewhere I wanted to be. So that kind of lingered. Um, the 2006, the homicide on campus, that was a very different kind of experience. It almost confirmed that for me, like, oh, wait a second, this was more reason, to not put yourself in these spaces. And then obviously after the mass shooting, I added a few more pieces to that.
Yeah.
So when I say that I ran for my life, and that's the truth, I ran for my life and was able to get in a car and leave campus.
Mhm.
And as we were leaving campus, all of the emergency vehicles were coming to campus, and it's a blur, but they were coming from every possible.
Right.
And so for me now, if I see more than about 3 in a line on a highway, or
Yeah.
really anywhere, and that's interesting right now. It's very interesting right now because there's a lot of protection associated with schools reopening.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of that. And I have to kind of constantly check. I used to call it, I don't know if you know anything about fainting goats, but it's like these goats that stiffen up when
Mm.
they're afraid.
Oh.
And it's just a body response. I used to call what I did fainting goat syndrome, which is not it at all. But it was like I stiffened up. I just
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
freeze. I know I have the word for it now, but it's a freeze moment.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. But the other thing was, like, I don't do very well with lots of people leaving an area, or
Mhm.
lots of people coming into an area. So that's always made, like, concerts
Yeah.
or conventions, conferences, classes,
Mhm.
difficult, because it's like, how are we all going to get out that door?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How is everyone going to get in this door? So that's very, movie theaters, that's very
Mhm.
difficult for me, and has been. And I've managed to sort of work through those
Yeah.
things. Um, COVID's really helping me out with that right now, because nowhere's really crowded.
Yeah.
Got to look for silver linings everywhere.
Absolutely.
Um, but that is a thing, and then I am very sensitive to sounds, and kind of stuff I notice out the corner of my eye. So my office has a couple of windows, and there's a few trees in front of it, and the landscapers just get my attention every single time, because they've
Mhm.
got, like, clippers, and they've got things
Yeah.
attached to them, and
Yeah.
I look and I take note, and it's fine.
Yeah.
But there's that moment of,
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So I would say I have a hard time kind of being anywhere
Mhm.
fully comfortable, which sounds so sad, but I think that taking ownership of it helps me to kind of
Yeah.
go, "I'm not comfortable.
Yeah.
Let's look around and take an assessment of,
Right.
can I be comfortable?"
Mhm.
And I've made that a practice. And being, that's when I talk about kind of paying it forward. I'm very, very aware of that in
Yeah.
people. Um, and I'll tell people, oh, that noise is such and such,
Yeah.
or that person is such and such, or the exit is that way. Like, I just kind of do that
Mhm.
automatically now, which,
That would be I think this would be a great I don't know if it's a class or training or
yeah,
whatever, but it would be great for you to just discuss with other survivors some of those, you know, what do you call it? Yeah, can't think about it right now, but just some of those feelings that you may have after, being involved with gun violence within itself, just some of those triggers, or,
Yeah.
some things that, and how to, like you said, assess and adapt and move through. That would be a great for survivors to be a part of, to, and to be more open about talking about those things that does, trigger us. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that from you. I'm gonna be like, yes.
Was that the proposal?
Yeah, I'm so serious. And I trust me, a lot of things that I'm sure that happens on our podcast, or just you just speaking publicly, Everytown gets an opportunity to listen. Other survivors get an opportunity to listen, and then they take it back, and it actually helps and works for us. So we're, it's better for us to know. I think that because we've been so, I guess not necessarily conditioned, but because we understand the feelings, and we've been through it, and we see it happen with our other fellows or survivors. We do have a lot of say of what can do to help the next person. So I'm sure that this will get back, and you'll be doing something, or doing some type of training on it. We'll see. So I think the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, how did you get involved with moms, and talk about Everytown?
Sure, that's a great question. All three of my incidents happened before moms was even a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there were a few organizations, but it wasn't something I was ready to do. And then moms was formed, and obviously incidents happened, and my recollection of the Sandy Hook day is a whole other session for us. I could talk about that for 30 minutes, but I'm not going to. And I remember just watching moms form.
Yeah.
And watching friends of mine from Virginia Tech and from that community get involved with moms. So I watched and kind of paid attention and hit like, followed everything on social media, and wasn't ready. I thought that non-injured thing was keeping me kind of away. Like, who's going to listen to me, Yeah. And I, when I would talk to my friends and family, oh, such and such happened and this happened. Again, you'd see a hashtag, you'd see a ribbon, you'd see a this, you'd see a that, you'd see this flurry. And it's interesting because I'm glad, I guess, in a weird way, that Facebook has that way of dredging up all your old memories to show you what happened.
Yeah.
Days that's great. Some days it's not great. And one of the days that's not great for me is those pre-days where I was like, again? Again? And it, and then, as I mentioned, I did a lot of art stuff. So I went to a lot of concerts, went to a lot of movies, went to a lot of things to help me escape or entertain me. And I joined Moms the day after the Vegas shooting because it got to my concerts. And I was like, you're not taking my concerts to guns. And I just got mad. If you get my husband in here, he'd be like, she was furious. I had to take days off of work. I was just furious mad. Very grateful that I had friends very involved in moms. And I was in North Carolina at the time. And I said, I'm ready, but I'm not, I'm shy. I'm not going to get a megaphone. I'm not going to get on a stage. This is not a thing. So they got me with data. So they were like, here, come do data. And I'm like, that'll do. I could get involved in this. And I went to the Women's March. So it was October. And then I went to the Women's March that year. And I wanted to be with the moms. And another mom was like, what brings you to moms? And I told her a little bit about my experience.
Yeah.
And she handed me the orange survivor button and was like, and I guess it just connected.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh,
kind of have a sense of home, right?
Yeah. And then it sunk in. And I was like, well, okay, well, maybe I'll learn a little bit about the opportunities they have with survivor programs. But again, I've also been a very, what's the word I want to use here? I've always been the first to kind of share my platform with someone who's not necessarily going to get the platform. And I saw my Black and brown friends dealing with a lot of gun violence in their communities. And I'm like, this does not need another white lady coming in and standing on the stage. And so I had a lot of that embedded in me too, which, I still think about that now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, grateful that we're taking that turn with this organization. So not to get into that, but I'm grateful that we're doing that, but that was part of it for me. And then, so I started learning more about data, and I'm like, I'm not going to be on stage, but I'm happy to tell people in small gatherings. And I remember me and the chapter lead and the data lead were learning and teaching me on data. And then the next day was Parkland. And it was just like, my heart went to these kids. I was like, I know what the rest of your life is going to be like.
Yeah.
I know what, like you mentioned, the person who was in another room. My heart immediately went to the custodian in another wing of that building, hearing that and shutting that door, or someone who's in the bathroom. Like immediately my heart was like, okay. And so it just kind of snowballed after that. I was like, I gotta do this, and I gotta get over the kind of selfish hesitation and be there for them. And I remember I look on posts from that now, and I'm like, you kids, I get you. I got you now, but more importantly, I got you 10 years from now and 20 years from now when you're sitting in your office and a stack of books falls next door, lose it, and you snap and you can't do it anymore. I'm your girl. Call me. Like I had this just feeling. And I want to mention, I'm child free by choice. Like I've never wanted kids. And I think that's one of the things that drew me to education. And then this is it. These kids that are going through this generation, this is happening to over and over and over again. These are my kids. So again, kind of like my why, my reasons sort of keep coming up. And then wanting this organization to listen. I'm not saying anything negative, I promise every time, but wanting them to listen, listen to survivors differently, listen to communities differently. And if I've got to get in there, and I come with my students now, I call myself like a termite activist, where I'm not the one who'll get out and like break the wood and break the foundation down, but I'm going to get into the wood. And work on the structure. And I feel very strongly. So that's what I'm kind of trying to do. But in this nice, empathetic, helpful, trauma-informed way as I possibly can, like a little termite.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I love your analogies and
thanks. I don't know how I would talk if I didn't talk analogies. So.
No, I mean it's just it's a really interesting way to look at it at at your perspective, because of course, like you were saying, in the Black and brown communities, they see it so totally different. In mass shootings, that's totally different. Gun suicide, totally different. There's so many aspects of what gun violence is and what it looks like to the individuals, and also the experience that they had. Like if it's not your family member, but it was your best friend, that's totally different, but it doesn't minimize your pain. So it's good that we do have the fellowship and survivor programs, and moms just continuously is in the fight to help us find our way, and I'm so glad that you're a part of it.
Fellowship training, not to interrupt, but I want to give a shout out to class of 2019 real quick, because when we were the last in-person one, who knows for how long, and the first night we were all, as you get together and you have dinner, the table I was sitting at had 8 people, and 5 of us were mass shooting survivors, which, you know,
Wow.
statistically was odd because
Yeah.
it's a small percentage gun violence, you know, pie chart wise.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was just very moving for me that we all had very different
Mm.
experiences.
Hmm.
Is
Right.
different things. So I would not be as healthy as I am on the days that I consider myself healthy
Yeah.
without the fellowship program. It's been instrumental in getting me to this point.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. Totally get it. Tell us why, and I know you spoke on this as well too, the mental health piece and why that's been such a huge part of your advocacy. And I know you said for personal reasons, but is there anything else to talk about as far as mental health goes?
Um, we just got to erase the stigma. I don't know any other way to put this except that we've got to erase the stigma of having mental illness in whatever form, in whatever degree. It's super, super important to me to talk about it and be transparent. I've had every diagnosis that you could possibly imagine with this: PTSD, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, borderline personality disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. I've had so many different things, and I'm with a therapist now that's like, you realize basically all of this is under the umbrella of PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And that's work that goes into that. And I talk about my mental health, and I talk about the weird stuff that I say weird, those of us who are in this little group understand that it's, you know, when I have a bad mental health day,
Yeah.
I have made a decision a few years ago to not invent a stomach ache. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to tell somebody I have a headache, so I'm going to stay home. I'm going to say, I'm mentally unwell today.
Mm-hmm.
I need to take some time and just make this conscious decision to be transparent. Safe, mind
Yeah.
you. Don't
Yeah.
reveal everything, because one of the things with mental health is boundaries and oversharing and things of that nature. And I have a tendency to do both of those things, but really firm it up and be like, I'm having a bad mental health day. Or if I forget something and it truly was because I had a dissociative moment, or I had, I was triggered by something, say, this happened, or I had a moment where my mental health was not very strong. My brain hurts today, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, I had a headache last night and I'm tired. Like, I'm going, not that that's not valid, but really, really, that's the word I was looking for. Really validate that mental health is something everyone deals with, and it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't ever want to be a counselor or a therapist, but will I be not formally, you know what I mean? Will I be like an advocate for that? I feel a little Oprah, like, you get therapy. You should have this kind of therapy, and you should all the time,
Yeah.
Anyone who meets me, I'm like, have you done therapy? Because I think it might work for this thing that you're dealing with. I want to destigmatize medications, and those of us that need help with the chemical side of things, because it's brain chemicals and how your brain responds to trauma. Again, a whole other day of podcasting, but sometimes those of us can't do it on our own. Our bodies aren't going to do it on our own, and we need some help, with that. And what that help looks like is very different for every single person. And I have been through the ringer with it, because, everybody's body chemistry is different and is going to respond to things differently. And I think just really being open about that, and having a few people in your life that are open about it and talk about it, or being that person for the people in your life that are open and talking about it. Say, so you tried Zoloft? Yeah, I felt like da-da-da on Zoloft. Okay, I promise you there's another solution.
Yeah.
I keep going back to keep going, but it's true, because kind of navigating the mental health space, especially when there's access issues, financial issues, healthcare issues, all kinds of stuff. No shade to anyone, but we need to talk about it so that
Mhm.
people know that it's important, and really advocate for resources and solutions.
Yes. I hope I'm like not smiling at people thinking like, oh, why is she smiling? I'm just so amazed at the question that I ask, and it opens up to be so much more of what we need to hear, really what the podcast is here for. Sometimes I just get, I just be in, I'm in awe with my guests. Like you, yeah, I am. I truly am, because I asked just a simple question, but it opens up so many more parts of what need to be told or what needs to be said. And I appreciate that, because someone needs to hear it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, I didn't specifically ask you about that, but it just opened you up to be able to share exactly what somebody, I know, I could feel it while you were talking, that somebody is going to need to hear just what you just stated. So, ooh, I'm so excited.
And that's
So,
that kind of conversation, and that the ability to, I go all the way back to that friend telling me it's going to get worse before it starts to taper off and get better.
yeah.
If I know, because I know her, she's a friend of mine, she probably was like, should I even send this? And she did.
Uh-huh.
And it was that thing, and I think about that kind of stuff with, and we go the original reason we brought me on in September, and further reason, was suicide awareness and prevention.
Yeah.
And if I could go back to the last conversation, is there something
Mm-hmm.
that I was hesitating to say
Mm-hmm.
that I could have said? Now, you
Right.
can't what if yourself into a hole. I've been there, I've done that, but I can do that from here on. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So that's
Absolutely.
sort of what I think about. It's like, is there something I could have said? Because the last words I said to him were, "See you later."
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
And,
trust me. I
and
get
I know
it.
and
Yes.
that happens with all of us. It's a what didn't I say? And I don't want to. I teeter on the line of like, well, don't just like, here's all the words you've ever said in your life. But
Yeah.
is something that you say going to connect with somebody
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and help?
And
Or is it
trust me.
just like air?
No, 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 no. A lot of things that you've stated today, like I said, it's totally off of what I'm not off of what the question was, but it brought so much more clarity to the question surrounding it, mental health, just in its entirety, things that I didn't even think about when I was planning to ask the question. It just came from you, just, wholeheartedly, how you feel about it. And I'm just grateful for that, because a lot of times I don't know who's watching, but I'm just prayerful that, individuals that need to hear what you have to say. Um, um, and I'm just so grateful that you have shared as much as you have shared, just being vulnerable, just allowing us to hear your side. So, is there any particular legislation that you would like to share or bring awareness to at this time?
I will say that is my weak link in this advocacy work, is knowing and understanding like the build numbers and all of that. I'm fully supportive of the bill that's been sitting and waiting, the background checks and all of that. And I mentioned that one specifically because Corey was able to buy his gun
Yeah.
the same day.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And one of my things since that, one of my anger moments since then was, even if they had delayed it by 2, 3,
Right. Yeah.
and then reconnecting with his sister years later, this year, last year, my time's running together with that, but two things. One, he and the Virginia Tech shooter bought their firearms from the same shop. And yeah. And two, because family has the ability to see the paperwork, and whatnot from that purchase, that she told me that she could tell in his handwriting that something was wrong. And someone behind that counter can't tell that something was wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you can add a layer between that and him having that gun, honestly, either of those two young men, and I'm
Yeah.
not terribly forgiving of one, but and mournful of the other, which is my own issues, my own demons. But truly, if you had added a layer, we don't know.
Yeah.
And so anything that I can do to advocate for extra layers between the want of a firearm
Mm-hmm.
and the getting of a firearm,
Yeah.
I personally advocate for. And then really it's just, I wrote this down. I advocate for a shift in the culture.
Yeah.
I advocate for courage in the leaders to help shape that, to model the shift in culture that we need. And when I vote and when I advocate for people, I am looking at the type of person they are and the things that they're going to say to the best of my ability.
Mm-hmm.
Is this someone that's going to hear my story and go, this might be something here, and actually act with interest of that kind of thing. So it's less specific, and I'm not the person to get up and start talking about a politician or start talking about legislation.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll always say, if you need someone to come in with a why, I'm your girl.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of where I live with that kind of thing.
What's your call to action?
Well, goodness gracious, right now we're in election season, so vote.
Yeah.
Vote. I want to stress I've been saying down ballot. I'm going to say up ballot. Look at who's running locally for you.
Mm-hmm.
Know who's doing that. Make sure you're registered to vote. Specific call to action, text vote to 64433. That's Everytown's tool to help you get that started. Make sure you got the right registration. Make sure you know who your candidates are. So vote to 64433. And when we get a little closer here, which I guess would be now, I have been in the habit of writing 64433 on my hand.
Yeah.
And people will be like, what's that? And I'm like, oh, you need to text vote to 64433. It's just like, it's like kind of reminder organic thing. So
yeah. Okay. Perfect. What's next for your journey?
Hopefully my doctorate.
Right. Yes.
Stay tuned. I want to share this experience with other educators and with people who are admin in education. So I'm looking to hopefully do that in the next few years. Do some research, true research, put my education hat on. My parents will be super excited for Dr. Cohen. So
Absolutely.
So we'll see. And then, I keep going back to keep going, honestly. Just if I'm derailed in that for whatever reason, it's because I'm called to something else. And so I may not know what that is yet.
Yeah.
So just kind of keep doing good trouble.
Absolutely. And do you have a personal quote that you could share with the Grief Nation listeners?
I really, do we have another hour? No. No. I want to share a quote that I read this past spring on a anti-racist class that I took with Dr. Ibram Kendi. And he said, you can't bring about change if you don't believe it is possible. Cynicism is the kryptonite of change. And it just sticks with me. I have it in my email signature. I have it written in spots because, and he's a very powerful person who has been through so much and an incredible educator. And if you ever get a chance to listen to him speak, please do. He has a lovely, lovely voice and tells wonderful stories. He's a multiple time survivor of life thing.
Okay.
So it just really touched me. And I love that quote.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. So how can Grief Nation listeners hear you or hear from you? What are your social media platforms?
I am on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. And I am also a newbie, but on TikTok. So if you're young and you're brave enough to join, the Twitter and Insta are at Ashley_CSEA_BBEE. So So Ashley, C like the ocean, B like the insect, on both of Instagram and Twitter. And then on TikTok, I am at anti-violence, like auntie, as so many say, depending on where you live. But I say anti-violence is me on TikTok. And then of course Facebook. You know, you can find me from various Everytown fellows and people by doing that.
Okay. And before I let you go, because of this is called Grief Talk, if I had to describe, or if you had, excuse me, if you had to describe what grief is, what would you say?
A journey. Not in any way linear. Hell.
Yeah.
And also very enlightening at the same time. Yeah.
And I think you answered both. It's not what it is and what it's not. So thank you for sharing that. And before I let you go, what has your attention being a leader in your community that you would like to see change or bring some further awareness to?
Well, we've talked about it a lot this session, which is mental health, decreasing, eliminating eventually the stigma of being treated and handling mental health. And I go back to it every time, but it's like when pressed by people who think they're against our movement in gun violence prevention, and they say it's a mental health issue, my answer is always going to be yes, it is. And you need to help us support that instead of fight back against it, And if I have to get into an argument with somebody with that, then I will happily do that. But not happily, but but I will do that, and I will always say you're exactly right. It is a mental health issue, but it's one we all need to support and find resources for. So I'm going to work with my community, specifically my school that I work with, my students that I work with, to do my best and help bring about the change I want to see, as they say.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to Ashley Cohen and having her on the show today. I truly appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, Ashley.
You're welcome. You're very, very welcome. Thanks for having me. It's been a lovely conversation. I'm glad to have gotten to know you.
Absolutely. It's been a blessing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Well, there you have it, Grief Nation listeners, and thank you for tuning in to another transformative segment on It's the Miami Night Show, Grief Talk. Today, we give thanks filled with love and gratitude for our special guest, Ashley Cohen, for expressing your very unique grief journey and sharing ways of understanding the healing process. This is your girl, Miami Night, with much love and light until we connect again spiritually. Bye-bye. It's the Miami Night Show. Hey, yeah. Slow mo. He's got me walking that groove one. Going slow mo. He's got me talking that groove talk. Going slow mo. He's got me clocking away. What up, tribe? It's Miami Night Show, Master Grief Coach. Welcome to the Miami Night Show. He got me walking that grief walk. It's time for Grief Talk, y'all.
I talk about things you think about.
It's Miami Night Show, Master Grief Coach.